Alright, so now more on evaluating the functions continued. This little thingy here we consider to be a piecewise function, okay? The piecewise function pretty much tells you to follow the directions, right, when you're evaluating or when it's asked to evaluate. So I'm going to call this one A, when x squared, when you have x squared plus 1 is less than 0, when x is less than 0. And I'm going to call this one B, when I have x minus 1, when the number is going to be greater than or equal to 0, okay? So if I say, for instance, evaluate and find f of negative 1. Well, negative 1 is my x value, right? So which directions would I follow in order to use my piecewise function? Well, I would use directions A because negative 1 is less than 0. So I use this equation to plug in. So this will be negative 1 squared plus 1. Well, negative 1 squared is 1, and 1 plus 1 is 2. So I have evaluated f of negative 1. Okay? Now, f of 0. So I'm looking at my directions, and when it's greater than or equal to 0, I use this function, right? So since x is 0, I would use 0 minus 1, and 0 minus 1 would just give me a negative 1. So f of 0 equals to negative 1, right? So now I have f of 1. Again, I'm using my directions, so I would use directions B because 1 is greater than 0. So this would be 1 minus 1, and 1 minus 1 is 0. So just know that f of 1 would equal to 0. So again, the piecewise function, you just have to pay attention to the directions, and then according to that direction, you follow that equation, right? So finding values for which f of x equals to 0. So now this is saying that whenever I see f of x, I'm going to plug in 0 for f of x. So this will be 0 equals to negative 2x plus 10. Obviously now that I need to find my value of x. So that means I need to subtract the 10 from both sides. And then this will give me a negative 10 equals to negative 2x. And then divide by negative 2 on both sides. And then this will give me x equals to positive 5. And then I found my first value. Now sometimes it could be a slightly bit more tricky, but you just have to use all the stepping stones we have done to get to this point. So f of x is going to go in for 0. So 0 equals to x squared minus 5x plus 6. Well, now I say, what's the best way to solve for that? Square root property, quadratic formula, or factoring? I would say factoring. So I say, what multiplies to be a positive 6 and adds up to be a negative 5? Well, that would be 0 equals to x minus 3 times x, minus 2, right? And then I set both of those factors equal to 0. So that would be x minus 3 equals to 0 and x minus 2 equals to 0. So I add a 3 to both sides and x would equal to 3. And I add a 2 to both sides and x would equal to 2. So now I have 2 of my solutions. So also a good example of things to do with our functions is finding values for which f of x will equal to g of x. That means we're going to set both of these functions equal to each other and then solve for x. So I have x squared plus 1 equals to 3x minus x squared. Well, now I need to get everything onto one side. So if I do that, that means I'm going to add an x squared to both sides, and that'll give me 2x squared plus 1 equals to 3x, right? Then I need to subtract a 3x from both sides, right? And then this is going to give me 2x squared minus 3x plus 1. Right? So now I have a little bit longer problem than I anticipated, but that's quite all right. Now we need to factor, right? I have this x squared minus 3x plus 1. So I would do my A times C method. So 1 times 2 would just give me 2, but what multiplies me negative multiplies to be positive 2. It adds up to be negative 3 with negative 2 and 1. So this would be 2x squared minus 2x minus 1x plus 1. So I factor by grouping, and I group together the first two, and I can factor out a 2x, and then I'm left with x minus 1. Group together the second two, and I can factor out a minus 1, and then I'm left with x minus 1. So now I have x minus 1 comes out, and then I'm left with 2x minus 1. And then of course, remember that all equal to 0. So now I set my two factors equal to 0. So x minus 1 equals 0, and 2x minus 1 equals 0. So my first answer would be x equals to positive 1, and my second answer would be x equals to positive 1/2 when you solve. Now, moving along for the last part of the video, evaluate difference of quotients. So f of x plus h minus f of x all over h. Of course, when h does not equal 0. Anytime you have 0 at the bottom, that means that you have something that's what? Undefined. So the first thing I do before I get to there is I'm going to do a x plus h. So I have a f of x plus h equals to x plus h squared minus 4 times x plus h plus 7. So I need to FOIL this, and this will give me x plus h times x plus h. And then I'll distribute here, and this will give me a minus 4x and a plus, and a minus 4h plus 7. So this will be x times x, which will give me x squared. Then this will give me a plus xh plus another xh plus h squared minus the 4x minus the 4h plus the 7. Right? So if I can combine some of my like terms, the xh can be combined. So that gives me x squared plus 2xh plus h squared minus 4x minus 4h plus 7. That looks horrible for you, huh? So now with that being said, I found just the f of x plus h, right? So I need to combine all of that together for the function. So this will now be, if I plug this in, x squared plus 2xh plus h squared minus 4x minus 4h plus 7 minus my f of x. So if I'm subtracting my f of x, that'll be minus x squared minus 4x plus 7, right? Because again, that's my original f of x. All over h. Well, don't forget to distribute your minus sign, this would now give me a negative x squared, a positive 4x, and a minus 7. And then bring down what you had before. The x squared plus the 2xh plus the h squared minus the 4x minus the 4h plus the 7 all over h. Now you say, well, what can I cancel out, or what can I combine together? Well, I have an x squared and a negative x squared, so those cancel each other out. I have a negative 4x and a positive 4x, so those cancel themselves out. And then I have a positive 7 and a negative 7, and those cancel themselves out. So then I say, well, what am I left with? I'm left with 2xh plus h squared minus 4h, all over h. Well, don't all of these terms in my numerator have something in common? It's called an h, right? So if I reduce everything by h, this will give me 2x plus h minus 4. And then that would be my final answer. All right, so we'll have a worksheet on some of this information when you get there. Thank you, and that's it.